there's different like categories of poses that we do, and one of the things like when I was training to become a yoga instructor, it didn't like really occur to me because I was only seeing things from the perspective of the student up to that point. But yeah, like the poses are like categorized. You have like standing poses, and you have prone poses, and you have supine poses, and you have kneeling poses. But basically, when you're teaching a class, you just go down the line. Like you usually start off with like child pose, and then you do some sun salutations, and you do some standing poses, and then you do like balance poses, then you do like an inversion, and then you get on the mat, then you do like a hip opener, then you can do some supine poses. A lot of hip openers you do from the ground. So basically you start them out, you get them warmed up, you do the standing poses, you do the inversion, you do the balance. Oh man, did that say 2100? Holy nuts. And then you do the hip opener on the ground. You can do any like prone poses on the ground. I didn't realize this until I had started teaching, but or started going through the training or whatever. When you go into class and then they tell you, do this pose, okay, now do this pose, now do this pose, now do this pose. You think that they have that like memorized, like it's like planned out. They're not. They're making it up as they go along, actually. And the reason is that any plan that you had for your class, you're just like, well, you know, I'm gonna, like, first of all, are you just gonna memorize a series of 30 poses, you know? I mean, I guess maybe you could. But the thing is that you never know who's gonna, like, walk through that door. So it's like, well, so if you had this challenging, like, practice laid out, you're like, oh man, I'm gonna make him sweat so hard, I'm gonna push him so hard, I'm gonna push him to the limit. And then, like, 3 people walk in who've, like, never done yoga before. You know, then what? Then you gotta throw all that out the window, take it back to the very beginning, and do, like, full explanations. That's something that I would normally do. If you have, like, people that are, like, super experienced with brand new people, it's like, how do you satisfy everybody, you know? Luther is changing elements, use counter elements, alright? Because if you go too gentle on the people that are wanting a challenge, then they won't enjoy that class. And if you push them too hard on their first practice, they won't like it, and then they won't keep showing up. So just trying to keep everybody happy is something that's important. And then after a while, you start to, especially when you go to the studio that you teach at, you get a sense of like where different people are at in their own practice. Well, what I normally do whenever you have like super new people with super experienced people, I just go ahead and just say, since we have some new people, I'm just going to do full explanations with the poses. But for the most part, I reckon the students are pretty understanding about new students and be like, hey, I have to take extra time to explain, to go through the poses and like demonstrate the poses to like the new people, you know. But yeah, going back to what I was saying earlier. So for the most part, the teachers are just kind of making it up as they go. But it's fine because it's actually not, like, once you teach for a while, it's actually not that hard. You basically just, like, there are certain other poses where it's logical. I mean, like, you always want one pose to, like, flow into the other one. So basically, I'll just, like, do an example. Like, if you do, like, Warrior 1, you're already standing, you're already close to doing, like, a Warrior 2. And then when you do a Warrior 2, all you have to do is straighten your front leg, and then you're ready for, like, triangle pose. And then once you're in triangle, you already have one of your hands and one of your feet down. All you have to do is push onto your front hand and your front foot, and now you're in half moon. And then once you're in half moon, then you can bend your upper leg, reach with your upper arm, grab your upper leg. Now you're doing half moon with bow. And then once you're in that pose, then you can slowly raise your hand up and raise your torso up, and now you're in dancer pose, and that's a balance pose. It's a standing balance pose. So you can link one pose to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, you know. When it comes to like deciding what pose to go to transition to, you only have a limited options of how many poses does it make sense to go to from this pose. So you just pick one of those poses, and then once you're in that pose, you're like, okay, what makes sense? What pose can I easily transition to from here? So you end up just going, so it's almost like having like multiple like forks in the road. Like you have this fork, and then now you're in this one. Okay, well now these 4 different poses make sense to go into. And then you go, and then when you're in that pose, now you have a couple of other poses that make sense to go into. So you'll eventually, it's kind of like a choose your own adventure or sort of thing, you know, where you're picking multiple branching paths, and then different branches lead to different branches. So you sort of end up not ever doing the exact same thing twice unless you choose to do the, you know, if you just pick a different pose, if you just go, well, I normally go from this pose to this pose, so I'll just go from this pose to this different pose, and then that opens up different possibilities later. So it's actually pretty easy to not end up copying what you've already done or whatever. I guess it's not copying if it's your own class, but you know what I mean, right? It's easy to make every class like different enough to where they won't really catch on to that. A lot of the poses are, we do a lot of the same poses, we just like link them differently and stuff. It's kind of like the Taco Bell menu. It's like super rare that Taco Bell adds an extra ingredient. They're just so good at just making different combinations of the same 10 ingredients, you know?